Page 63, Melody. This is not really called melody, but that's what they're calling it in this book. It's a famous melody from a Tschaikowsky symphony. Wouldn't hurt to go read about these, composers. Learn a little bit about them. They wrote some beautiful music. Sometimes they were jerks as people, but their music is fantastic. So in melody, again, we don't have anything new. Melody is written in the key of F. We've had F before, right? F has one flat, B flat. So all B's in this piece are going to be B flat. Now in addition to that, they've got some accidentals stuck in. Your hands are also going to move around a little bit. I've never found Tschaikowsky music to fall under the fingers all that well. I mean, he was an amazing composer, but his piano music is a bit of a challenge for me, all right? Other composers, their music actually, many of them, they fall under the fingers pretty well, but Tschaikowsky did it. Take a look at the first line. Let's just talk about the right hand, all right? We're going to start out with the fifth finger on A. That puts you in this position. So you have that first measure, then the left hand takes the melody for the next measure, and then for the third measure, notice you got to move your hand down one so the F is played with the fourth finger. Okay. Again, you ought to be able to move your hand down or up one key without looking at the keyboard. So try and do this without looking at the keyboard. Second line's like the first, no biggie. Then for the third line, you got to go back up to F position. But you got a one measure rest to do it in, so it's not bad. Which is probably good because you're actually moving both hands here. Then for the last line, you go back like on the first line. Now, the next to the last measure, that's not an F, it's a D, but it's the same position as if you were going to play an F, but instead you just play the D. So you have to move your hand down one is what I'm saying. In the right hand, you're starting out in the second measure there at the top, and that is part of the melody, so make the melody line sound like it's played by one hand. Just make it, practice that a little bit. You don't want the listener to think, what happened? Because they don't know what happened. Just make it sound like it's played by one hand. That takes practice. Now in the third measure of the first line in left hand, you have an F and an A flat. Now, I've talked about this before with ties. Now we finally get it. In the last measure, going from the third measure to the fourth measure, that F is tied. You see the curved line underneath? You're not going to play the F again. You're going to hold it down, keep it down, and just play the A natural. Okay? This is a very common type of thing in piano where you hold one note down while you're doing other things. Now, the next line, you're moving your hand down a little so your thumb is on C. So in the first line, the thumb is on D. Now the thumb is on C. And now in the third measure, that's an E, B flat. Okay. Well, in the second measure, you're in this position. Third measure, that E is not in this position. But if you'll remember the 5-7 chord, that's a 5-7 chord. Okay. So it's no big. You just left out the C. You don't have to play all the notes in a chord. You can just play some of them. It's still a chord. Now, I like the fingering they put in here. This is a good fingering style. Last two measures of the second line for the left hand. Look at that fingering. You have a 5-2. And then the last measure there, you have a 4-1. So you're going to play the 4, connect them. Also, at the same time, you're going to stick the thumb under and play the A. Connect them, all right? That is a good fingering. I like that fingering. Get good at that. It's a little tricky at first, a little awkward, but get good at it because it won't stay tricky and awkward. In the third line, then you got to go up to the E flat, which is up here. You get a one beat rest. Of course, again, you're moving both hands at the same time. So you don't have to move both hands literally at the same time. You can move one hand, you're here. You can move one hand and then the other. And And in a minute I'll tell you an easier way to do it. Okay, well, let's come back to that. So you're here, third line here, third measure is here, and the fourth measure is here. Remember the chromatic passage where it was going 3-1-3-1? Well, this is a case where it's not that fingering. It's a chromatic passage, but it's not that fingering. It's starting with the 1. It's just going down the fingers. And there are a number of chromatic passages that use this in combination with the other, 3-1-3-1 to get you through it. Okay, so be flexible on the chromatic passage fingering. The last measure of the third line is here. You're ending up here. And then when you go on to the last measure of the first line, you got to move your hand down so the index finger's on the B. And it is a B natural because there's a natural sign in front of it. Otherwise it would be a B flat because there's a B flat in the key signature. How do you get from here to here? Okay, well there's several different ways of doing it, but let's not get into all that junk now. I don't want to confuse you too much. Just go ahead and know that you're going to go from here to here. Get where you are and where you need to go and which finger's involved, and just work that out. It doesn't take long to get there, and you can practice that move. And there's a little bit of silence in there, but that's okay because we're between phrases anyway. So now the last two measures they're the same as the last two measures of line 2, where you have here and this fingering and 4-1 for the last note. I didn't do that right because the notes didn't go down at the same time. Get the notes down at the same time. Practice that so you can. In the next to the last measure in the left hand, you'll see they put a flat with parentheses. Again, this is just a nicety. It is a B flat because of the key signature, but they put in the flat in the music just to remind you it's a B flat, because there was a B flat or B natural 2 measures earlier, and they don't want you to think it's still a B natural. Well, I would hope you would know it's a B flat because we've crossed 2 bar lines. The first bar line canceled the natural out. So yes, it's a flat, which is why it's in parentheses. It's unnecessary. All right, they're just they're reminding you, oh, by the way, this is flat. I point it out because I want you to understand everything you're seeing in the music. You're moving both hands between the second and third lines. At the end of the second line, you're here. And the beginning of the third line, you got to go up to here. I tend to use an index finger on that black note because I don't like using thumbs on black notes. Because I can do an index finger on the E flat and then a thumb on the D. Just as easily. You don't have to use this fingering. They're suggesting it to you. But frankly, I like 2, 1, 3, 4 better. It's up to you. However, the point is you're moving your hands from these measures. So to help simplify it a little bit, and when we move our hands we try and figure out ways to simplify it. There's not much you can do in the left hand. You got to go from here to here, and they're using thumb on both. Another reason not to use that thumb on the E flat. I'd go up to here. That's how I do it. You can do a thumb if you want. It's all right. But in the right hand, we can do something a little different. The right hand, you're ending here, and you're starting here. That's an octave. Okay? Just stretch your hand out to an octave. So you're here, then you have a 1 note rest, leave your hand there, and just come up here to an octave. And then when you're here, you can clap your hand again. You can do that during the rest. So you're here, 2, 3, rest. So you're not moving the hands so much as you're just stretching out, getting you where you want to go, and then collapsing. It's a solid technique to use in piano playing, and I recommend you learn it and get good at it. It's not just the octave. Other things, other movements are similar, but so that simplifies that motion because you're here. Now we want to go here. I really only have to concentrate on the left hand because that's the one that's really moving. The right hand, I got you. Let's try this out. It's in 4/4 time. I will give us 4 counts and then we'll have a rest on the first beat. So go ahead and put your hands where they're going to go. All right. All right. 1, 2, ready, go. Rest. 4, rest. 1, 2, 3, rest. 4. 2, 3, off.